Hello there and welcome for this week's archaeological video where I'm talking about modern archaeology. Last week and first video in this playlist, it was a video about explaining kind of what is archaeology and a small kind of historiography of archaeology. And now I'm going to talk about modern archaeology, so the evolution of what actually made archaeology more of a discipline, a bit more in depth. Looking at the key principles and then its evolution from the 1800s through to the 1960s, the 1980s, 90s, and then to where it is today with a bit more in depth and that. So we'll crack on. So we have the first thing which kind of derives into archaeology was from a geologist called James Hudson from Scotland, and in his work, The Theory of Earth in 1985, he kind of laid the groundwork for what is known as stratification. And essentially what stratification is, as you can see on these images, is that the soil has different layers, and these different layers accumulate at different moments in time. So we have on the far right is what would be just geologically looking at it. So you start off this lumpy sand, then it goes to salty clay, then to clay, and so forth. But on the left image, you can see actually archaeology is also the same as different layers. Different periods have different layers, and in these different layers have different objects, and can tell us quite a lot of things. And this kind of this idea of stratification builds on to Charles Lyne's principle of geology, which essentially he says that ancient geological conditions are the same, if not similar, to our present soil conditions. So not much has changed in the soil conditions from ancient times, prehistoric times, to now, other than different variations in soil with different events. While this can be applied to humans, human archaeology and human evidence in the soil is quite similar, and that this kind of establishes onto the antiquity of humankind, where this intellectual mindset starts to happen, where because of learning that soils are from different periods dating back thousands of years, the idea of the biblical origins of humanity kind of falters. We know that humankind have evolved and have been on this planet much longer than what the Bible says, which is about 3,004 years ago. So this idea kind of goes out of date. So the next principle that modern archaeology is built on is the concept of evolution. Again, this is not an archaeological idea that started off, because it's made from Darwin. It's a biological concept, which is with his book The Origin of Species in 1859, where the idea of evolution and the based on the survival of the fittest of the most adaptable. And this can be seen, this idea of evolution, where things are being improved upon over time to something new, then it's improved upon again, and so forth. And this idea came to archaeology in typology and artifacts, using them to categorize, let's say, a simple spearhead, then it goes into an elaborate spearhead, and an even more sophisticated spearhead. It's a progression of time, so we can use that as chronology. And the other aspect is society. So Karl Marx used the origins, the evolution theory in his societal works, where the evolution of society, so this progress from hunter-gatherers to like small city towns to cities to monarchy, then democracy, monarchy, and then in the end it will be a social utopia in his eyes. And then the last key principle is known as the three-age system. So this is developed by C.J. Thompson, a Danish curator at the National Museum Copenhagen, where he published a book in 1838, which is a guidebook to the museum, where he essentially categorizes all the objects into three areas: the Stone Age, because they were stone objects; Bronze Age, because they were all bronze; and Iron Age, which, as the coin follows, made of iron. And his English book became a bit more widespread in 1848, which was the Guide to Northern Archaeology, which established this idea of this three-age system. And it does work, actually. For Europe, it's quite viable. For Africa, it's a little bit different. Their Bronze Age is a little bit longer, and their Iron Age is much longer. In the Americas, they do use bronze before the arrival of the Europeans, but mostly it's the Stone Age. And then we see actually also that the Stone Age again is also split up into the Paleolithic, early Mesolithic, which is the middle Stone Age, and then Neolithic, which is the new Stone Age. But this idea of classifying artifacts into ages and having this chronological ordering was important to archaeology. So this leads on to what is the first start of actual modern archaeology, which is this classification phase. So building upon these three principles that I've just said, which is the three-age system, the theories of evolution, and then stratification, the ideas of kind of builds upon this. And this is also during the time where early civilizations were being dug up and found. So we have ancient Egyptians are revisited with the Napoleonic Wars, Mesopotamians a little bit after, the Mycenaeans with Schliemann towards the end of the 1800s, the Minoan again also end of the 1800s. We also have the Peruvians that get founded, Aztecs are starting to get dug up. All these cultures start coming up, and this is where this phase of these huge assemblages are being categorized. They're being chronologically put in date due to what is seen as a progression, this descriptiveness of this. What we see is what we get of these cultures. And towards the end of this phase, we have probably one of the geniuses in archaeology, Gordon Childe, where he tries to connect all these cultures, different regions and locations and artifacts to have this shared connection, mainly in Europe. Because previously people would be working on their own little bits, so people would be working just on Britain, then on maybe some people working on France, Greece, but not really combining it. And what he does is actually for the first time is try and combine these together. And in these first two publications, The Dawn of European Civilization and The Damnium in Prehistory, he tries to tackle these questions to bring about this shared connection of cultures and people that, you know, they aren't alone. They are interacting with each other. They share the same origins. And he tries to attempt this. I mean, in his last book in 1938, which is The Man Makes Himself, he tries to answer how civilizations come about in more detail. And what his ideas was during the Neolithic, this revolution happened where this domestication of farming, both of plants and animals, just blew up, and it led to this urban revolution where people started to come together because food could be produced much easier, and you can have bigger food yields, so you can have bigger population, creating these towns and cities that led on to these civilizations. And that's what he tried to do, is this connection between multi-regions and multi-history and multi-cultures that wasn't seen before. Unfortunately, he passed before his time, so who knows what great things he could have done after this. And then the next key bit that happens just after this classification phase, which goes up to the 1960s, is at the end you have archaeology starts to become more of a science. We have after World War II, in 1949, a chemist called Willy Libby makes an invention called radiocarbon dating, which essentially physically dates objects through isotopic analysis of carbon to find out how old they are. And you can see on this graph that's kind of how this is done. And it kind of builds upon what Gordon Childe was doing, which was connecting these cultures together, which was a bit difficult beforehand because different chronologies could become different dates. But now you could physically do an object from Greece, an object from Italy, an object from Britain, radiocarbon dated, and you can have them in the same timeline. So you could say that Greece at this point is building cities and towns, Italy is starting to come small villages, while Britain is still hunter-gathering at this time. And we see in the 1960s more isotopic analysis is being used. So we have strontium isotope analysis, which is used on provenance, so figuring out where humans are coming from their teeth, the enamel, from bones. We can also get it from oxygen. We can tell about environment. And then in the 2000s, sorry, there's a mistake which says 200. It's supposed to be 2000. So the turn of this later century, DNA starts to come up where we're looking at genealogy or kinship in burials. It's still very early days and problematic, but it should be quite interesting when it comes. And then at the end of the 1960s, a kind of change in archaeological thinking was coming about, which is known as New Archaeology. So this is led by a guy called Lewis Binford in a series of articles about a new perspective that archaeology can take in the 1980s. And he argued that the approach should to be trying to use archaeological to write a different history, to look at different stories. So instead of just describing, but investigate avenues of social and economic aspects of the past of different cultures. And they argued that interpretation should be built on a logical framework rather than personal authority of the research. So this aim was to describe the past by explaining it, not just describing what is happening, but go out why it is happening. And this led into studies of subsistence, of technology, social substructures, ideological, trade, demographic. And these new studies are labelled archaeology to go more scientific, so using facts and interpreting the facts rather than history, which is describing what's just happened from what we can see. So they have more computer-aided technologies, more quantitative techniques, and becoming more interdisciplinary. So using ideas from geography, from anthropology, from the social sciences, from economics. So you see archaeology starts to become this mutant of a thing where it starts to interconnect with lots of different disciplines. And this idea is what is known as Postprocessor Archaeology. This is where have lots of different things which is different to the old. So we have the nature of archaeology. Instead of it being, it's now going to be explanatory instead of descriptive, as I said. So the archaeology's role is now to explain past change, not simply just reconstruct it and how people live. And this involved explicit theory, so using it's just essentially explaining what's happening or trying to explain what's happening. Then we have explanation, so it's a cultural process rather than a cultural history. So this progression as seeing why things are happening. Traditional archaeology was seen to rely on historical explanation, but new archaeology is drawing on the philosophy of science, which would think in terms of cultural process, how changes in economy and social structures took place, which implies sometimes a bit of generalization, but also detail. Then we have reasoning. It's a deduction instead of induction. Traditional archaeology saw archaeology resembling a jigsaw puzzle. The task was piecing it all together and take a picture. Instead, the appropriate procedure now is to formulate hypotheses, construct models, and then deduce their consequences. So you're creating hypotheses from the data to explain why this data is here. And then we have valorization, so you're testing things, you're using these hypotheses, testing again and again, and consulting things rather than just using the authority of one person or a standing research. And this focus kind of leads on to project design rather than just collecting data. We should be doing research to answer these questions, not just simply generate them and just record them. And this choice approach becomes more quantitative rather than just simply qualitative. So we're using the benefits that we see of quantitative data, allowing computerized statistical treatment. Excuse me, Alexa, stop. Unfortunately, I have an Alexa and it comes off an alarm that lets me know to try and take out the cat litter every so often so we don't forget. But where I was so I was talking about choice of approach. So we're looking at quantitative rather than simply qualitative. These benefits were seen for qualitative data, allowing computerized statistic treatments with the possibility of sampling and significant testing. This was often preferred to purely verbal traditional approaches. And the last one is looking at scope. We're trying to be more, maybe a bit more pessimistic, but it's this optimism versus pessimism kind of thing, where traditional archaeologists stressed that archaeological data was not well suited for reconstruction of social organizations and cognitive systems. But new archaeologists differ this. They say, how do you know until you try? You've got to try these things to answer these questions. And this sort of idea kind of lasted for about 20 odd years until Postprocessor Archaeology came about. And this is the next evolution stage. And we have different aspects and different schools come from this, which is a reaction to processual archaeology. So we have like the neo-Marxist elements, which has a strong commitment to social awareness. It is the duty of an archaeologist not only to describe the past, but to use such insights to change the present world. This is a different change from aspiring to the objectives of processual archaeology. So we're using the past, we're looking at it more individualistic, and seeing how this individualistic look how can we learn it to improve the present. As the old Winston Churchill saying is, we can learn from history so we don't repeat its mistakes. And then we have a post-positive approach, which rejects the focus of systematic procedures of scientific method central to the process of archaeology, sometimes seeing modern science as hostile to the individual, forming an integral part of the systems of domination, which is the focus of capitalism exerting their hegemony. So this is more of an anachronistic approach, again looking at the individualistic side, looking at how archaeology can tell stories of single individuals. Then we have the phenomenological approach, which is looking at spiritualistic, looking at the overall picture. What did the past think about the world that they're living in? So this emphasizes on personal experiences of the individual on the way which encounters the material world and objects that shape our understanding of this world. So landscape archaeology, for example, archaeology is set up to experience the humanly shaped landscape that has been modeled and formed by human activity. So you're seeing the landscape of what it has become because humans have shaped it by chopping down trees, building a tumuli, which is a burial mound, or putting a wall here, etc. Then we have the praxis, which is practice approach, which lays stress on the central role of the human agent and upon this primary significance of human actions in shaping the social structures as well as objects. So many social norms and social structures are established by the shape of the habitable experience. So this notion of habitus. So as you're growing up around the fireplace, around the home, your parents are teaching you the manners, the cultural norms of the time, and this shapes you and the society around you and mediates this social practice. So the role of the individual as a social agent is emphasized. And we have the last one, the Hieratic approach, which rejects generalization. So this is the emphasis that uniqueness in each society and culture is on the need for the study of full extent in all its diversity. So really exploring the nitty-gritty details, going in, exploring every avenue possible. And, essentially it's the establishment of Deuteronomies, and it's to break up this relationship between norms, individuals, processes and structures, material and ideal, and objects and subject. So unlike processual archaeology, this new form is about, one must argue that archaeology should be free to develop its own methodology rather than being in this structure where we have to look at different stories. And this is kind of the end of this kind of talk at the moment, because at the moment current archaeology is pretty much the same. It's an open book. It's a mixture of post-processual, it's processual archaeology. It's also different schools of archaeology have their different ways, and this is what I'll be going on my next week, where I'll be exploring a little bit into detail and briefly talking about what landscape archaeology, experimental archaeology, maritime archaeology, battlefield archaeology, and exploring what are these different aspects and what is coming about. And at the moment archaeology tends to follow trends in in the political situation. So at the currently isotopic analysis and definitely DNA of provenance has been high in archaeological data and integrating with the sciences. And despite this poor situation with the coronavirus, afterwards there'll be archaeological papers and books coming about diseases of the past and using current data. But at the moment, archaeology is an open book in where it can go, and that's kind of, you could say this is the golden age of archaeology, where lots of things are being explored in different ways, in different aspects. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I do apologise for the noise of my Alexa and the slight mistake on one of my slides, but I'm still learning at this, and hopefully next week should be a bit more ironclad. So I hope you enjoy and have a lovely week.